Would anyone care to guess the last time the Cavs made the playoffs without LeBron James on the team? That would be 1998. How about the last time they advanced past the first round without LeBron? That'd be 1992. The Cavs prior to the 1990s were consistently pretty terrible. And then after the 90s, any success that this franchise had was tied to LeBron James. But after trading for Donovan Mitchell seemingly out of nowhere, you can put this Cavs young core up against any young team in the league for brightest future. And I think people are likely forgetting that pretty late into the year last year, the Cavs were fighting for home court in the first round before they got injured to hell and back. So for them to add a fringe all NBA caliber player and proven playoff performer in Donovan Mitchell, who's still only 26 years old, to a team full of young players headlined by all-star Darius Garland, all-star center Jared Allen, and in my opinion, future perennial all defensive team, center slash forward, and possibly future defensive player of the year, Evan Mobley, still only 21. Yeah, it's a pretty stacked young group of players. Even basketball fit wise, Donovan Mitchell is exactly what the doctor ordered here. The Cavs were desperate for a guy who could create his own shots down the stretch of games. It's what sunk them throughout the regular season, and it really came back to bite them come play in time. It was pretty much solely on Darius Garland to create for himself and others throughout the entire game, with some small flashes from rookie Evan Mobley, but he's still really early on in the development of his shot creation skill set. Donovan Mitchell has proven he can go toe to toe scoring wise with anyone in the league, be it in the playoffs, on the biggest stages. So it's going to be awesome to watch how he and Darius Garland are able to play off one another as a backcourt. And that's going to allow Evan Mobley to shift to being the third option as a playmaker, something he's going to be far more comfortable with and better suited for at this stage in his young career. And while so far I have been really singing the praises of Donovan Mitchell here, he's far from a perfect player. However, the Cavs as a team have the tools and resources to mask a lot of the deficiencies that he has as a player, unlike Utah did, or unlike the Knicks would have had he been traded there. Last season, Mitchell showed some really questionable shot selection. However, like Garland, it was pretty much up to him as being the only source of shot creation for Utah outside of an aging Mike Conley and a pretty inconsistent Jordan Clarkson. So going from Conley to Garland as your backcourt mate is a massive upgrade. So I think Mitchell is going to have a lot more trust in his Cavs teammates, particularly Darius Garland. Also, early on, when star players get paired together, a lot of times there's an overemphasis on cooperation. So I expect both Garland and Mitchell to almost defer to one another too much as to not step on each other's toes, as opposed to both fighting each other for touches, trying to maintain their more ball dominant styles. Garland has already shown himself to be an unselfish player and a willing passer. So after some initial growing pains, I think they're going to get this figured out. Outside of that, Mitchell was just really unhappy in Utah. So I'm sure there was a fair amount of screw it, I'm shooting this out of like sheer contempt for the organization. Defense was the other big wart on Donovan Mitchell's game last season. But as I mentioned, in a new and hopefully happier situation here in Cleveland, I think his efforts on that end are going to improve. And in the NBA, effort is at least 75% of defense, maybe more. Mitchell has shown flashes and has the tools to be a good defender. So maybe after all the criticism he received this offseason, he's put in the work so that he'll at least be solid on that end, if not good. But even if he doesn't improve at all and he's still a total liability out there, the Cavs are actually really well equipped to make up for that and mask a lot of that lack of defense. Both Mobley and Allen are elite level rim protectors. Allen is fairly switchable on the perimeter, and Mobley is absolutely going to be one of those guys that you can switch 1 through 5. We saw in Utah, even with traffic cones out there as perimeter defenders, as long as you have an elite rim protector, you're at least going to be middle of the road defensively. The Cavs were top 5 in defensive rating last year, so I expect them to be around that level again this year, if not higher, based on the development of Mobley and Allen, even if Mitchell is a total disaster defensively. That's not to mention the Cavs have some really solid perimeter defenders, guys like Ricky Rubio and Isaac Okoro, who can take on those tough guard matchups. So even though 47.5 wins projected is a pretty high win total to hit, it's still only four more games than what they won last year. So with another year of development for their young players, hopefully a better bill of health, and adding one of the best closers in the game in Donovan Mitchell, it's a pretty strong over for me. But before we start planning the parade in Cleveland this year, I think we need to pump the brakes a little bit. I still think this team is at least a year away from being a true contender. This isn't the case of just running it back with a promising young team. They've added a piece here who's going to drastically affect the basketball landscape here in Cleveland. So, along with that, with such a young team, there's going to be a pretty steep learning curve. And as high as I am on Evan Mobley, and believe me, I think the world of him, I think he's at least a year away from being really special. Also, throughout the course of these previews, I've been kind of mentioning how deep the league is now, how all the teams are really good, with the exception of a few, and particularly how deep the Eastern Conference is this season. I'm not even sure that this Cavs team is guaranteed to avoid the play in. Of the Eastern Conference teams that made the playoffs last season, the actual playoffs, and avoided the play in, I could really only confidently say that the Cavs are better than the Bulls. But the Hawks and the Nets are also going to be competing for that final playoff spot. So let's just take the Bulls out of it. We have the Heat, the Celtics, the Bucks, the 76ers, Raptors, Nets, Hawks, and Cavs. Two of those teams are going to make the play in. And all of those teams I just mentioned are really good. Most are veteran led teams with some playoff success in their recent history. So it's going to be an uphill battle for the Cavs. I can't confidently say that they're better than any of those teams that I just mentioned, but I also can't confidently say that they're much worse than any of those teams that I just mentioned, if at all. Last thing I want to mention is how thin the Cavs are on the wing. It really is just Caris LeVert, Isaac Okoro, and Cedi Osman as options for the starting three, maybe sprinkle in Dean Wade there. LeVert, while he is a really good shot creator, he just isn't big enough or good enough as a defender to really fill the Cavs' needs there. He's likely going to be much better served to come off the bench and provide some shot creation for the second unit. Okoro hasn't shown himself to really be a consistent enough shooter yet to rely on. And Osman is just sort of meh as a player, both as a defender and a shooter. He's just kind of meh, whatever. So, as currently constructed, I just don't think the Cavs have enough on the wing to make a lot of noise in the playoffs, especially given all of the good wing players that you have to face out east. Now, for the good news for Cavs fans is this Cleveland team still has some moves left to make. Jay Crowder is almost exactly what they need. So maybe you could talk the Suns into doing like a LeVert for Crowder and then finding whatever else you can on the Sun side to make the money work. The Suns also have Cam Johnson, who makes a lot of sense for Cleveland. So if the Suns decided that they're not wanting to pay him, that could be an option. Maybe if the Kings sputter out of the gates, you can pry Harrison Barnes away from them. They also have the Kevin Love expiring contract, which is a really great way for a lot of these tanking teams to shed some salary. I'm not sure what the move ends up being, but the Cavs still have some moves available to them despite the high price that they paid for Donovan Mitchell. And while I'm not quite ready to move the Cavaliers into the front runner in the East category, I would still consider them a dark horse, and I wouldn't be totally shocked to see them make some noise as early as this year. But going beyond this season, the East better look out.